The year was 1939. Before we start, please like, share and subscribe to my channel as it helps with me creating more content. Thank you. The world watched in horror as Nazi Germany, led by the iron fist of Adolf Hitler, plunged Europe into chaos. The thunder of tanks and the scream of dive bombers shattered the fragile peace. Great Britain, led by the unwavering Winston Churchill, stood defiant against the Nazi threat. Across the Atlantic, the United States, though initially hesitant, prepared to join the fight against tyranny. The world was at war again, a conflict that would test the very limits of humanity. The stakes were higher than ever before. This wasn't just about borders on a map or political ideology, it was a battle between good and evil, freedom and oppression. Millions of innocent lives hung in the balance, and the outcome would shape the course of history for generations to come. From the beaches of Normandy to the deserts of North Africa, the world became a battleground. The Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy and Japan, sought to impose their will through force and brutality. Their armies, fueled by a poisonous ideology, marched across continents, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. The Allied forces, composed of nations like Great Britain, the United States and the Soviet Union, stood as a bulwark against this tide of darkness. They fought not for conquest, but for liberation, for the hope of a better world. In a small town nestled amidst the rolling hills of America's heartland, James lived a simple life. He worked in his father's shop, spent his Sundays at church, and dreamed of marrying his sweetheart Mary. War seemed like a distant rumble, a storm brewing on the horizon but not yet threatening his peaceful existence. Then, the fateful day arrived. The radio crackled to life, announcing the news that would change James's life forever. Pearl Harbor had been attacked. The United States was at war. A wave of patriotism swept across the nation, and James felt the call to duty deep within his heart. He was afraid, of course. He had heard the stories from his grandfather, a veteran of the Great War, about the horrors of trench warfare and the constant threat of death. But fear was a luxury he could not afford. He knew that the fate of the world, the future of his loved ones, rested on the shoulders of ordinary men like him. With a heavy heart but unwavering resolve, James said goodbye to his family and enlisted. He promised Mary he would return, clutching the small locket she gave him as a symbol of their love and a reminder of what he was fighting for. As he boarded the train that would take him away from everything familiar, James felt a mix of trepidation and determination. He was leaving behind the innocence of his youth, stepping into the unknown, uncertain of what lay ahead. The training was grueling, designed to push the recruits to their physical and mental limits. James learned how to handle a rifle, dig a foxhole, and work as a team with his fellow soldiers. He befriended a diverse group of young men from all walks of life, each carrying their own fears and hopes. They were united by a common purpose: to defeat tyranny and return home as heroes. The vastness of the Atlantic Ocean stretched before James, a seemingly endless expanse of water separating him from the battlefields of Europe. He stood on the deck of the troop transport ship, the salty wind whipping at his face, a mixture of excitement and apprehension churning in his stomach. The journey across the Atlantic was fraught with peril. German U-boats, lurking beneath the waves, posed a constant threat to Allied shipping. The fear of torpedoes striking without warning, sending the ship and its human cargo to a watery grave, hung over everyone like a shroud. The days blurred into an endless cycle of cramped quarters, seasickness, and the constant drone of the ship's engines. James spent his time writing letters to Mary, playing cards with his buddies, and listening to the veterans share stories of past battles. Their tales were a mix of bravery, humor, and stark reminders of the harsh realities of war. As much as they tried to maintain a facade of lightheartedness, James could see the fear in their eyes, the ghosts of battles past haunting their dreams. One particularly stormy night, the ship was caught in a fierce gale. The vessel tossed and turned violently, threatening to capsize at any moment. James clung to his bunk for dear life, the terrifying sounds of crashing waves and howling wind filling the air. He prayed as he had never prayed before, begging for deliverance from the raging storm. When the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a trail of seasickness and relief, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had survived the wrath of the sea, a testament to his resilience and a sign that he was meant for greater things. As the ship approached the coast of England, the reality of war hit home. The air was thick with tension, the distant rumble of artillery fire a constant reminder of the battles raging on the continent. James and his comrades disembarked, their boots sinking into the mud, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. They were no longer boys playing war games back home. They were soldiers about to face the fiery crucible of combat. The beaches of Normandy were a scene of unimaginable chaos and carnage. James, part of the second wave of the D-Day invasion, waded ashore amidst a hail of bullets and explosions. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, blood and fear. He saw men cut down around him, their bodies ripped apart by enemy fire, their screams drowned out by the deafening roar of battle. Instinct took over, adrenaline coursing through his veins. James moved with his squad, taking cover behind whatever meager protection they could find. He fired his rifle blindly at the enemy positions, the deafening crack of gunfire echoing in his ears. Time seemed to both slow down and speed up simultaneously. He was acutely aware of every bullet whizzing past his head, every explosion that shook the ground beneath his feet, yet he was also operating on pure instinct, reacting to the chaos around him without conscious thought. The beach was littered with the bodies of fallen comrades, both American and German. The sight of so much death, so much suffering sickened James to his core. He had never witnessed such brutality, such a complete disregard for human life. In that moment, he understood the true cost of war, the price paid by those who fought and died on these blood-soaked sands. As the day wore on, the tide began to turn. Allied forces, despite suffering heavy casualties, gained a foothold on the beaches. James, his body weary, his mind numb from the horrors he had witnessed, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a burning desire to survive. He had faced his fears, stared death in the face, and emerged from the crucible of combat a changed man. Section 5. A Brother in Arms. Amidst the chaos and brutality of war, James found solace in the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers. They shared their rations, their fears, and their dreams for the future. One soldier in particular became James's closest confidant, a young man named Thomas from a small town in Mississippi. Thomas was a skilled marksman, a natural leader, and a source of strength and humor, even in the darkest of times. They fought side by side, their lives depending on each other. They shared stories of home, their families, and the girls they left behind. Thomas spoke of his mama's cooking, the smell of magnolias in the air, and his dreams of becoming a teacher after the war. James confided in Thomas about Mary, sharing his fears of never seeing her again, his hope that their love would survive the horrors of war. One cold night, huddled in their foxhole, seeking shelter from the relentless rain and the constant threat of enemy artillery, Thomas confessed his fear to James. "I ain't afraid of dying," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." James, placing a comforting hand on his friend's shoulder, replied, "We'll never forget you, Thomas. We'll make sure your story's told, that your sacrifice is remembered." Their friendship, forged in the crucible of combat, transcended their differences in background and upbringing. They were brothers in arms, bound by a shared experience that few could comprehend. They relied on each other for support, for courage, for a reminder that even amidst the darkness, there was still hope, still humanity to be found. Section 6. The Weight of Command. As the war raged on, James found himself thrust into a leadership role. His courage under fire, his ability to make quick decisions, and his unwavering dedication to his men earned him the respect of his superiors and the loyalty of those he commanded. He was promoted to sergeant, a responsibility he didn't ask for, but one he didn't shy away from. The weight of command pressed heavily on James's shoulders. He was responsible for the lives of his men, tasked with making decisions that could mean the difference between victory and defeat, life and death. He studied maps late into the night, planning strategies, trying to anticipate the enemy's moves. He wrote letters to the families of fallen soldiers, each word a heavy burden on his soul. He grappled with the moral dilemmas of war, the fine line between following orders and doing what he believed was right. He saw the toll that combat took on his men, the way it chipped away at their humanity, leaving them haunted by what they had seen and done. He struggled to maintain their morale, to remind them of the cause they were fighting for, the hope for a better future that kept them going. One mission in particular tested James's resolve to the core. He was ordered to lead his squad on a reconnaissance patrol behind enemy lines, a dangerous assignment with little room for error as they moved stealthily through the dense forest. The constant fear of discovery gnawing at their nerves, they stumbled upon a group of German soldiers taking a break, seemingly unaware of their presence. Section 7, A Glimmer of Hope. The war dragged on, a relentless cycle of violence and destruction. James and his comrades fought their way across Europe, liberating towns and villages from Nazi control. They witnessed the horrors of the concentration camps, the unspeakable atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. The experience shook them to their core, fueling their determination to defeat the enemy and bring an end to the madness. But even amidst the darkness, there were glimmers of hope. James encountered acts of kindness, courage, and resilience that restored his faith in humanity. He saw the joy on the faces of liberated people, the tears of gratitude in their eyes. He shared his rations with starving children, their smiles a beacon of light in the darkness. He received letters from Mary, each one a precious lifeline, a reminder of the love that sustained him. He carried her locket close to his heart, a symbol of the life he was fighting for, the future he dreamed of sharing with her. In the spring of 1945, as the Allied forces closed in on Berlin, James received word that his younger brother, Robert, had been wounded in action. He rushed to the field hospital, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. He found Robert lying in bed, his face pale, his arm in a sling, but alive. The reunion was bittersweet, tinged with relief, and the sobering reminder of the fragility of life. Section 8, The Price of Victory. Victory in Europe was declared in May 1945. The news was met with jubilation and relief across the globe. James and his comrades celebrated, their hearts filled with a mixture of joy, exhaustion, and grief for the friends they had lost along the way. They had survived the crucible of war, witnessed the best and worst of humanity, and emerged forever changed by the experience. But the war had taken its toll. James bore the physical and emotional scars of combat. He had nightmares, flashbacks, and a constant sense of unease that lingered long after the guns had fallen silent. He had seen too much death, too much suffering to ever forget the true cost of war. He returned home to a hero's welcome, but the transition to civilian life was difficult. He struggled to relate to people who had not experienced the horrors he had witnessed. He felt a sense of detachment, a gulf separating him from those who had not walked in his shoes. He found solace in the company of other veterans, men who understood what he had been through, who shared his pain and his memories. They formed a brotherhood, a support system that helped them navigate the challenges of returning to a world that seemed to have moved on without them. Section 9, Homecoming. The train pulled into James's hometown, the familiar sights and sounds washing over him like a warm embrace. He stepped off the train, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his chest adorned with medals he barely felt worthy of. He saw Mary standing on the platform, her face radiant with joy, tears streaming down her cheeks. She ran into his arms, their embrace a testament to the enduring power of love and the hope that had sustained them through the dark years of war. The homecoming was everything James had dreamed of and more. He was reunited with his family, his friends, the people who had shaped his life. He shared stories of his experiences, carefully omitting the most horrific details, focusing instead on the camaraderie, the courage, and the moments of humor that had helped him survive. He married Mary in a beautiful ceremony, surrounded by their loved ones. They built a life together, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a brighter future. James found work as a teacher, sharing his experiences with a new generation, instilling in them the importance of peace, understanding, and the preciousness of freedom. But the war never truly left him. The scars ran deep, both visible and invisible. He carried the weight of his memories, the guilt of survival, and the constant ache for the friends he had lost. Section 10, Scars of War. James tried to resume a normal life, but the war had left its mark on him in ways he never could have imagined. The nightmares haunted his sleep, vivid and terrifying, transporting him back to the battlefields of Europe. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, the screams of his fallen comrades echoing in his ears. He found himself easily startled by loud noises, flinching at the sound of backfiring cars or thunderclaps. Crowds made him anxious, the proximity of strangers triggering a primal fear he couldn't shake. He sought solace in solitude, spending hours fishing by the lake, the tranquility of nature calming his troubled mind. He carried the invisible wounds of war, the emotional scars that ran deeper than any physical injury. He suffered from survivor's guilt, questioning why he had been spared while so many others had perished. He grappled with the memories of the things he had seen and done, the horrors of war forever etched into his mind. He found it difficult to relate to people who hadn't experienced the horrors he had witnessed. Their concerns seemed trivial, their lives carefree in comparison to the darkness he had seen. He felt a sense of isolation, a gulf separating him from the world he had returned to. Section 11, Legacy of Courage. Despite the challenges he faced, James refused to let the war define him. He found strength in his family, his love for Mary, and his unwavering belief in the importance of sharing his story. He became an advocate for peace, speaking at schools, community centers, and veterans groups, sharing his experiences with a new generation. He spoke about the horrors of war, the human cost of conflict, and the importance of diplomacy, understanding, and compassion. He stressed the need to learn from the mistakes of the past, to work towards a future where such atrocities would never be repeated. He shared stories of the courage, camaraderie, and resilience he had witnessed during the war, reminding his audiences that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could endure. He spoke of the bonds of brotherhood forged in the crucible of combat, the sacrifices made by so many to protect the freedoms we often take for granted. James's story serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring legacy of the greatest generation. Their courage, their sacrifices, and their unwavering belief in a better tomorrow helped shape the world we live in today. Their stories deserve to be told, their memories honored, and their lessons learned, so that future generations may never forget the true cost of war.